to the United National Congress, Sunday, June the 12th, media conference. With me this morning is Attorney at Law and Member of Parliament for Chaguanas West, Attorney at Law for over 20 years in the private sector, and Member of Parliament for Chaguanas West. Mr. Dinesh, Rambally will address you on some legal issues, and then I will follow with some education issues. So good morning, and we start with Mr. Dinesh Rambally.
Thank you, Dr. Gopeesingh. Good morning to my colleague, former Minister of Education, and of course members of the media gathered here, those who are following us on the live stream, and to all of Trinidad and Tobago. On behalf of the Leader of the Opposition, the Honorable Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, and all of my parliamentary colleagues, I welcome everyone this morning to this our weekly Sunday morning press conference. Today our press conference is of course themed, Our Country is in Crisis Under the PNM. As you all know, our country has been awash with embarrassment with the conduct of our latest Attorney General, Mr. Reginald Amor, Senior Counsel. The Attorney General, and some of us will know this already, but for the purposes of our presser this morning, I want to recap a few things. The Attorney General is a creature of our Constitution with responsibility for managing the legal affairs of Trinidad and Tobago. He is the legal advisor to the Cabinet, and as such, he is a member of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And crucially, he is also the guardian of the public interest. In other words, he must contemplate what is in the best interest for us as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago in his legal dealings on behalf of the state. This responsibility is a fundamental one. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, the AG is expected to be a man with a seasoned understanding of the many sound legal principles that underpin a successful democracy and the rule of law. He is responsible for the ensuring, as they say, that justice is not only done, but that it must be seen to be done. He ought to know that once a conflict of interest arises, a recusal would be warranted, and therefore all necessary steps must be taken to avoid such conflict. This is what a country can and should expect from an Attorney General. Instead, we as a people have been dealt a humiliating blow as we witnessed our Attorney General, Senior Counsel Reginald Amor, throw himself, his government, and the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago into what can only be described as a self-engineered legal disgrace. I am sure you would have heard Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, Senior Counsel, Senator the Honorable Mr. Wade Mack, and my colleague MP for Sawa Barataria, Mr. Saddam Hussein, give their respective, comprehensive and compelling accounts of the slip and slide of error after error, untruth after untruth, as the Attorney General sought to defend his involvement in the criminal matter involving Mr. Brian Python and others, on substantially the same set of facts as the Miami case. To be clear, this morning I am making no pronouncements whatsoever on the merits and demerits of this case, which may presently be under appeal. Rather, I take serious issue with the fact that the behavior of Mr. Reginald Amor has now compromised the integrity of the office of the Attorney General, and his continued occupation of this office is a direct threat to good governance and the rule of law. Let me now briefly highlight to you how the Attorney General has run seriously afoul of his duties, obligations, and responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The very people whose interests he has an abiding duty to protect, and how his account of the events that transpired reeks of deception, and guile. Reginald Amo was a senior counsel when he was part of a legal team defending Mr. Brian Kwaitong and others against charges brought by the state of Trinidad and Tobago in connection with the Piaco Airport project between 2003 and 2008. And according to today's Express editorial, he was elevated to senior counsel by 2004. Today, he is sitting on the other side of the fence as the Attorney General of this country, the same country, the same state, the same republic, which is the plaintiff in the Miami case. It would be immediately apparent to any reasonable person, without even thinking too hard, that a conflict of interest has arisen. What the AG did next was startling. He tried his best to stoop, metaphorically speaking of course, to make his presence so meager so as to give the appearance of a very minimalistic involvement in this case. This, ladies and gentlemen, was a clear attempt at deception, and he was caught out. So, on the facts, let me briefly recap. Allow me to refer now to the media release of the Attorney General, in which he indicated earlier this week, and I quote, "On the 30th of March 2022, this is the Honorable Attorney General, Senior Counsel Reginald Amo. On the 30th of March 2022, I attended my introductory first virtual meeting by teleconference with Secor Law with reference to the Miami case, the purpose of which was to provide me with the brief status report on the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago's readiness for trial. At the very beginning," I continue with his words, "at the very beginning of that virtual teleconference, I immediately advised everyone present that I had previously represented the defendant, Mr. Brian Kwaitong, and his girlfriend, in matters involving charges brought against them by the police involving the construction of the then new Piaco Airport, and that, and this is his words, and that I wished the advice of Secor Law in respect of any conflict of interest in my participation in the Miami case." So, let me repeat that. The Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago asked the law firm Secor Law whether or not they think he was in a position of conflict. In other words, that possibility certainly crossed his mind. Are we to seriously believe that he, Reginald Amo, the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, could not ascertain for himself whether this was a conflict of interest, a principle that is seminal to the rule of law, seminal to the delivery of justice, and seminal to the safeguarding of our democracy? Instead, he continued to dialogue with the law firm Secor Law, entangling himself in certain aspects of the case and being conveniently, quote-unquote, walled off from others. As he, AG Amo, put it in his media release, and I quote, "From that moment I was walled off by Messieurs Secor Law from any aspect of the case other than case management issues. That is to say, logistics for trial, naming a person to attend the mediation and to attend the trial, and payment of invoices, as well as with regard to the Burke settlement, in respect of which I had signed a settlement document prepared by others in my capacity as the Chief Legal Officer of Trinidad and Tobago." He goes on, "As a consequence of my stated disclosure, I did not participate in any trial-related issues of any kind and delegated the continued case preparation to former Attorney General Honorable Faris Al-Rawi and Ms. Ramki Soon." So Secor Law saw it fit to wall off the Attorney General from some aspects of the case, but could not wall him out entirely. He already had his finger deep in the pie. But to add insult to injury, the AG then proceeds to tell us what aspects of the case remained under his purview when he was walled off. In a puerile attempt to again minimize his role, he awkwardly tries to shove all his responsibilities into one sentence to make it look like his role was so minuscule that it could hardly be a conflict of interest after all. So his involvement included case management issues, including logistics for trial, naming a person to attend the mediation, naming a person to attend the trial, payment of invoices, payment with regard to the Burke settlement, signing a settlement document from which he further tries to distance himself by saying that it was prepared by others. He was also in discussions about dropping certain claims brought by Trinidad and Tobago. Ladies and gentlemen, you tell me, in which universe can we pretend that this is not involvement? The Attorney General, having been informed that the parties concerned filed a motion to strike out the case because of a conflict of interest, which I just explained to you, was the reason why he was walled off in the first place by sequel law. The AG then signs an affidavit in opposition on the 24th of April 2022. In that affidavit, AG Armour himself admitted that, and I want to quote, "I gave my best recollection, stating the fact that I did not recollect any details of my former representation of Mr. Quaitong or Ms. Pierre, nor was I in possession of any files related to that former representation. I also gave my best recollection of my disclosure of conflict of interest declared to sequel law on the 30th March. Ladies and gentlemen, listen to this. He did not remember any details of this case. This man, Honorable Attorney General, titular head of the bar, he must be taking the all of Trinidad and Tobago for fools if he thinks we will believe that. Is he having a crisis of memory? Senior counsel? Senior moment? Because we cannot afford such lapses in memory by the holder of that office. He says as a lawyer working in the case, he only attended 1 or 2 meetings with senior counsel. Can we trust this recollection? Could it be possibly 3 or 4 or 5? Who can really remember? He deceptively tries to downplay his involvement by saying that he was merely a note taker in this matter in which he was actively involved for a few years. We should be very worried whether that was the best use that could be made of this senior counsel. He said he did minimal research. For a few years, the best use they made of this senior counsel, which he was at the point in time, was minimal research. Isn't that convenient, ladies and gentlemen? How inspiring is it for the population of Trinidad and Tobago that someone could travel from that low point of apparent legal lethargy to holding one of the highest public offices in this land? AG Armour further stated that he expanded his recusal to include the entirety of the Miami lawsuit to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest. That, unfortunately, was too little, too late. Did it not occur to him that remaining even partially involved was equivalent to a billboard screaming out conflict of interest? Going back to that Express editorial, and I do have it here, I will show it in a little while. Going back to the Express editorial today, we are told that in March 2015, within 3 days of being appointed president of the Law Association, Armour withdrew from all legal matters in which he was representing then opposition leader Dr. Rowley on the grounds of, and they quote, insulating the council and the Law Association from any charges of partiality against the association in anything to be done under my leadership. That is the quote as provided by the Express editorial. So he, AG Armour, is on record as having invoked the correct procedure to guard against conflict of interest on that particular occasion. Why did he drop the ball now? Let's be real, ladies and gentlemen. Someone who is a senior attorney representing such a high-profile case, calling himself junior lawyer to a senior counsel in one place, and mind you, as an attorney at law in my 20th year in practice, I have really no problem with that, you know. But then the Attorney General further tries to minimize his role in the case by calling himself merely a junior lawyer. So the senior counsel calls himself a junior lawyer in another place. This is dishonesty of the highest and reeks of deception and is totally unbecoming of such a high office holder. The Miami court refused to ignore the involvement of the Attorney General and his communications with sequel law and the attendant implications of that. The Miami court found that both, and I am quoting the Miami court now in that order that they produced, both Attorney General Reginald Amo and sequel law are disqualified from continuing to represent Plaintiff Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in this case. The order of the Miami 11th Circuit Court further stated, I quote, the Florida rules of professional responsibility expressly prohibit an attorney from serving as counsel on behalf of a client who is directly adverse to a former client in the same or substantially similar proceeding. Ladies and gentlemen, these, you don't have to be called to the bar in Florida, you know. These are essentially basic principles that even govern our local jurisdiction as well, our profession. It further stated, this is the quote again from the Miami 11th District Court, the court finds that sequel law is automatically disqualified under these rules from acting as Trinidad and Tobago's counsel due to Mr. Amo's prior legal representative of defendant Tong for 5 years in the parallel criminal proceedings, which are the same or substantially similar to the civil action brought by the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago before this court. Sequel law was working with and for Mr. Amo, who was prohibited from representing the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in a matter directly adverse to his former client. So the court had to automatically disqualify sequel law on account of our Attorney General, who is representing the state of Trinidad and Tobago, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, as a plaintiff in Miami proceedings. Ladies and gentlemen, a conflict of interest is a weapon of instability. You cannot casually dabble in it and expect that the public's confidence in our administration of justice will remain unshaken. It is unacceptable that someone in the caliber of an Attorney General will throw acid, so to speak, on the public's notion of justice, the hallmark of a good democracy. We did not need the Florida rules of professional responsibility to tell us what was the right thing to do. Our very own code of conduct is spelled out in the Legal Profession Act Chapter 9003 at the 3rd Schedule Part A Code of Ethics. It states, and I quote, at Section 12, an attorney at law should also bear in mind that he can only maintain the high traditions of his profession by being a person of high integrity and dignity. At Part 2, in relation, and it is a rubric heading in relation to the state and the public, at Section 13, this is what it says. An attorney at law owes a duty to the state to maintain its integrity, its constitution, and its laws, and not to aid, abet, counsel, or assist anyone to act in any way contrary to those laws. So that is our own Legal Profession Act. The reason why this, ladies and gentlemen, this blunder is unforgivable is because, one, it was self-engineered. Two, any appeal for which the AG has already signaled his intention is going to cost you and me millions of our taxpayers' dollars. Three, the Attorney General has brought the whole of Trinidad and Tobago into disrepute. If you look at all the media headlines and you use the legal law search engines, you will see Trinidad and Tobago really starring in a very bad light. The AG has brought the whole of Trinidad and Tobago into disrepute. As titular head of the bar, he has brought the legal profession into disrepute. His brazen but insubstantial defense of his well-established conflict of interest has the potential to erode the confidence in the administration of justice, which is the backbone of any good democracy. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Attorney General, and this is what I want to make this point now, must do the right thing and step down. AG's Amos, self-imposed vow of silence is an insult to the intelligence of the citizenry and is purely self-serving. In order for any semblance of integrity to return to the office of the Attorney General, as well as reinvestment of confidence by the public in the administration of justice, Mr. Reginald Armour, Senior Counsel, must resign with immediate effect. His continued corrupt occupation of public office will only serve to irreparably erode the public's trust and confidence in entrenched principles of our Constitution, such as respect for moral and spiritual values and the rule of law. Ladies and gentlemen, that is A.G. Armour. But the Prime Minister has a duty to act immediately. Should A.G. Armour refuse to step down with immediate effect, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley must act in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago and remove A.G. Armour. A.G. Armour's conduct has not only aroused public suspicion, but it has shocked the public's collective notion of justice. Honorable Prime Minister, on this issue, we simply cannot wait for your response in dismissing the AG or the explanation you will give for keeping him on, which I can assure you will be a hard sell. We are talking about protecting the democracy of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. The Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago. The silence of the Law Association in this matter is concerning. Under the Legal Profession Act, Chapter 9003, they have a responsibility at Section 5B, and I quote, to represent and protect the interests of the legal profession in Trinidad and Tobago. At 5D, they have the duty and responsibility to promote good relations within the profession, between the profession and persons concerned in the administration of justice in Trinidad and Tobago, and between the profession and the public generally. And at 5F of the Legal Profession Act, Law Association, you must promote, maintain, and support the administration of justice and the rule of law. The Law Association must act immediately. The Attorney General is the titular head of the bar. He is an ambassador of the legal profession, entrusted with a special and sacred duty to conduct himself in a manner that instills public trust and confidence in the profession and the administration of justice. A.G. Armour has fallen far short of these principles. The Attorney General is also required to be honest and forthright in the conduct of public affairs. He has a duty to preserve and protect the rule of law by ensuring that any representations made to the courts of law are truthful and accurate to the best of his knowledge. Again, Attorney General Armour has fallen far short of these principles. The Attorney General is the constitutional representative of the state of Trinidad and Tobago and thereby conducts litigation on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago, both domestically and internationally. He clearly has a duty as an officer of the court to ensure, an officer of the courts, locally and internationally, to ensure that he does not mislead a court in any jurisdiction. A.G. Reginald Armour has fallen far short of these principles. The Law Association therefore must act now. And I want to say that I saw an article today in the Newsday. This is the headline: Lawyers bid to move no confidence vote against AG. So this is coming from within the legal profession. But really and truly, you have a law association who has a mandate, a legislative mandate. They should have acted, as we would say in law, ex proprio motu. They should have acted of their own initiative, of their own volition, and have taken steps to deal with this matter, one way or the other. But, law association, we wait to hear from you. So I commend those lawyers who are seeking to make some movements, because clearly there is some, as I say, some concern, let me leave it at that for now, with regards to the law association. So, law association must act now. I want to say that yesterday we saw a Guardian editorial, and it is labeled Integrity in Public Life. So this is the Guardian. A very good editorial. I have found in the last couple of days some extremely crisp, very assertive editorials on this issue surrounding the Honorable Attorney General. So, Attorney General, don't let us have to remove that word honorable. You must do the right thing. So, integrity in public life. So, this was yesterday's Guardian. And today's Express editorial that I referred to earlier, you now have here, and if I may show you, again, as I say, you will see that it is a very crisp editorial. Armour's massive mess. This is the Sunday's editorial. So, what you're seeing is you're seeing a reflection in our major daily newspapers reflecting the views on the ground now. So, this is what we are dealing with. For these reasons, I want to add my voice and the voices of my colleagues in the United National Congress on the opposition to the chorus of voices calling for the immediate removal of this Attorney General from office. And I want to end this part of the presentation of the presser by quoting from E.B. White in his book on democracy. He says, "Democracy can be destroyed by a single zealous man who holds aloft a freedom sign while quietly undermining all of freedom's cherished institutions." So I would like to thank you for allowing me this opportunity to share these views. I would like, in closing, of course, now to say that I really want to commend the Leader of the Opposition for her role in crystallizing the issues on a real-time basis as it arises out of this unsavory state of affairs concerning the Attorney General, Reginald Armour, Senior Counsel. So I would like to thank her and, of course, my parliamentary colleagues. And I would like to hand over to, of course, a stalwart of the United National Congress, a man who has a long history in service of the people, a proven track record as former Minister of Education, and of course he's a former Member of Parliament as well. Dr. Tim Gopeesingh, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Member of Parliament Attorney Mr. Dinesh Rambally. Good morning to the viewing and listening audience, and thank you very much for listening in. This week gone has been a truly horrendous one for Trinidad and Tobago, as the nation was confronted with the very frightening truth and reality about the true state of school violence and indiscipline in our schools in our country. The Honorable Minister of Education was compelled to admit that she was not telling the truth when she had said that there was no school violence issues. It's good that she had to admit. So in an about turn, she now admitted that for the school term so far, there has been 1,318 student suspensions. It's both unacceptable for the Minister of Education not telling the truth, and of course to have 1,300 plus suspensions of students in our schools. But let me say categorically that it did not have to be this way. We should not be in this state, unpleasant state in our school system. This dangerous, tragic, and very alarming situation rests squarely on the shoulders of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley and every one of his failed ministers in his first 5 years of his term of office, and now nearly 2 years in the second term of office. All three ministers of education have failed him, have failed the country, have failed the students and the parents of this country. It seems as though this Prime Minister Rowley's government policy seems to be one of hateful, spiteful, and maliciously casting aside all of the progressive work done and gains made in the education sector, and indeed all ministries under the Kamla Prasad Desessar-led People's Partnership government from 2010 to 2050, which to date has recorded unparalleled historic record high achievements in all sectors of governance in Trinidad and Tobago, and I can say also in the education sector. I should know, because it was under my tenure as Minister of Education in Mrs. Desessar's cabinet, under her instruction and vision, that we implemented many policies to strategically tackle violence and indiscipline in our nation's schools at every possible level. But the moment that Prime Minister Rowley came into office, it would seem that his envy, his spite, his viciousness caused him and his two ministers of education to disband most, if not all, of those policies. He was the man who called first formers duncy heads, and the country must remember that. He described girl students as hyenas in the jungle and called school children monsters. So his contempt for our nation's children were very apparent early on. What else can it be when he calls these students the way that he has described them? So it has been long evident. Instead of dealing with these issues, he chooses to engage in name calling. But I must say this: no citizen, no parent, no student, no teacher deserves what is happening in our schools today. For this, Prime Minister Rowley must hang his head in shame. And let me go into detail. First, on the school violence. The indiscipline and school violence issues, so pervasive currently throughout the education system, is seriously affecting the national psyche and is very concerning to all parents and guardians for the protection of their children when they're going to school, during school, and even after school hours. We have over 250,000 students in our schools, over 96,000 secondary school students, about 36,000 early childhood education students, and 7 by 18, about 126,000 primary school students. So close to more than 1 million citizens of Trinidad and Tobago are seriously affected as a result of the school violence that is being perpetrated in schools. Prime Minister Rowley's government has failed miserably to implement any policy or program to halt or to reduce the worsening school violence as depicted in the social media and on national traditional media. And let me just say this, as Minister Dolly tried to imply, it is not increasing because social media is carrying some of the school violence videos and pictures. It is not increasing because of that, Minister Dolly. It is increasing because it is true and apparent because of your failures to implement the policies and programs which will halt and stem the tide of indiscipline and school violence. It is worsening because the Rowley government has not been able to implement significant policies or programs because of their lack of capacity, their inability and general incompetence to effect any meaningful measures. The answers were there and are still there for them to implement. We left them behind when we left in 2015, as I said. The over 22 policies and programs we implemented to deal with school violence. So over the last 7 years, all the gains that were made under Kamla Prasad Desessar-led PP government with respect to school indiscipline have gone through the window. They have thrown them out through the window because of hate and spite and vindictiveness. They don't want to accept anything that the People's Partnership government had implemented and put into place. They have thrown it through the window to the detriment of our students and our wider society. We all know that school violence is nothing new, but it had worsened and more so during these last 7 years of Rowley's government. We had a task force report from as early as 1985 on school violence. And when the partnership government came into office, we had 2 national consultations, each over a 3-day period, and 8 district consultations to address education issues. More than 5,000 educators participated in these consultations and made significant recommendations, many of which the partnership government implemented, and some of these in relation to school violence and indiscipline. And let me speak about them. We examined and researched all the task force recommendations going back from 1985 to the present, as well up to 2010. We searched the shelves of the Ministry of Education for any other research materials with identifying programs and policies. We then identified the most delinquent schools, and they ranged to possibly a little less than 50 secondary schools, many government secondary schools. And then Prime Minister Mrs. Prasad Bisesa mandated that we immediately set up a strong student support initiative. And remember, Mrs. Prasad Bisesa served as Minister of Education from 1997 to 2000. So she understood and knew the system. So I was instructed to ensure that we increased from the 300 who were there as student support services officers to full complement of over 700, which constituted guidance counselors, guidance officers, school social workers, educational, behavioral, and clinical psychologists, and even psychiatrists looking after the students in need. When we came in, there were about 300, and Mrs. Bisesa instructed that we move to at least 700 so that we can have the full complement of these officers within all secondary schools and some within the 425 primary schools. Guidance counselors, guidance officers, school social workers, etc. We also established 4 psychological educational enhancement centers for retraining the students who were suspended and for correctional management. And they were staffed with clinical and behavioral psychologists and even psychiatrists. We successfully ran several parenting and education workshops throughout Trinidad and Tobago, where parents were invited to educational seminars to help with the management of their children who were experiencing difficulties, particularly with some indiscipline. And then 90,000 parents throughout Trinidad and Tobago participated in these workshops. They were of tremendous benefits to their children, and you can still hear them speaking about it today in terms of their education, their children's educational performance, and with respect to their behaviors and not getting into school indiscipline. And ladies and gentlemen and members of the media, I'm giving you these areas which we implemented, which are available and which were available for Prime Minister Dr. Rowley's advice and information, where his 2 failed previous ministers of education in 2010 to 2015 threw out all of these out of the window. And this present Minister of Education has failed to adopt any of those policies and programs which were sustainable and which drastically reduced the incidence of school violence. But they have decided they don't want that. They're calling for a task force now. A task force 7 years after you're in government? What a huge failure. 7 years after you're now calling for a task force to deal with school violence, when you had 22 major policies and programs for you to implement, which you failed to implement. How damaging it is to the lives of those students and to the psyche of the students who see these unpleasant misbehavior amongst their colleagues. How do the parents feel when they see this on national television and on social media? Your job as Prime Minister and Ministers of Education is to help prevent this. And we had a launch as well of the first National Student Hotline. Free Talk, 800-4321. And I remember those, I came out as Minister in 2015. 7 years later, 800-4321. This was a national hotline for any student to call in to provide, and we provided professional counseling to students with confidentiality. And we relaunched and reformatted the National School Code of Conduct. We established a circle of hope in each classroom where students have a special session on a weekly basis when they speak with their teachers on issues that they may have. We partnered with the Ministry of National Security, Ministry of Gender, Youth and Child Development, and Social Development. They're now talking about bringing that task force with these different ministries, when all the recommendations are there, because we had partnered with these ministries long ago in 2010, 2011, and to be able to intervene on behalf of students deemed at risk. We had over 170 school health and safety officers to assist in the management of the students during the break, lunchtime, and even on evenings after leaving school, amongst other things. As soon as they came in, I understood that they fired them. 170 health and school safety officers. We engaged the police service department. I remember having many meetings with the police service and the commissioner of police in those days and his team to ask them support in getting some of these motorbikes, motorcycles, and so on, the police officers on motorbikes, to go around these 50 schools on mornings when the students were coming to schools and on evenings. That alone resulted in a significant decrease in the level of indiscipline and school violence. We increased the amount of CCTV cameras at all schools, and this assisted in identifying early problems of indiscipline among students and having them corrected and addressed at the early stage, CCTV cameras. We implemented systems where students were subject to walk-in body scans. They had these walk-in body scans. We rented 4 or 5 of these. We couldn't have 50 for the schools. We rented them. And we moved them from one school to another after 2 or 3 days. And the students were never aware of which schools these body scans were going. So they were aware that if they were caught moving in any firearm or sharp instruments and so on, they would be caught and disciplined and probably thrown out of the system. So that alone stopped it. It was not costly. So why can't we use these walk-in body scans as they have at the airports and so on? That's so on mornings, you enter through these body scans, you scan. You know what we also did? And I'm sure we still have those in schools. We provided each one of the schools with 2 handheld scanners so that they could search the bags of the students and search the students with the appropriate personnel doing that. And that significantly reduced the amount of things that were brought into the school. So we also established a parenting academy, and that was established to support the students who were identified by the Student Support Services Division. We appointed 85 local school boards. PNM had thrown that through the window. Mr. Manning didn't bother about that at all in his term, which ended in 2010. But we appointed 85 local school boards where community citizens sat on these local school boards. Citizens who knew the areas and knew the students who were going to school to give assistance in managing indisciplined students. And those local school boards had the principals of schools and other personnel who were very anchor with education matters. We employed substitute teachers to ensure that there was no classroom without any supervision during period to allow indiscipline to foster. Number 15, we implemented a number of the policies which were based on the 7 Ryan's task force report recommendations. God bless his soul, my good friend. Establishment of crisis management teams in schools. We established crisis management teams to deal with the matter. So when this poor child was complaining of being bullied, if they had these crisis management teams in place, that issue would have been dealt with and protected that child and the other one who inflicted the injury. Both of them would have been well taken care of, and it would not have reached the state that it reached. And so that is laziness, it is inability, it is incompetence, it is hate, it is spite, it is malice for anything that the People's Partnership implemented. Number 17, we established learning enhancement centers in 4 districts with clinical, educational, behavioral psychologists managing referred difficult students. So they went through a program of 6 weeks with these psychologists, and at the end of it, we were able to bring them back into the schools where they would have been through some process of remediation and psychological counseling. We established student councils in schools comprising principals, PTA representatives, members from the student alumni, and a student from the school. We had mentees program and motivational speakers in schools who would give the history of where they came from, how they have achieved success, and these motivated students in schools throughout Trinidad and Tobago. I remember going to Presentation College in San Fernando as Minister of Education and give a motivational speech to the students, and it was very warmly received. And this is when you speak about the successes of citizens and you give that to students, they embrace that and they say, well, I can be like that one day. You think they have time to go and fight and to have guns and put knives and all of that? We had partnering with the Citizen Security Program number 20. We had research and scientific in randomized schools. We randomized the schools across the country into students' performance, leading to implementation of needed programs. We constructed 40 gymnasium in government secondary school, 40 gyms. The boys who have a lot of energy and want to fight go to the gym and you lift your weights and become good athletes. And that was a beautiful process of making sure that the schools had gyms, and we were getting more and more students going into physical education and so on. We filled out most of the vacancies of Deans of Discipline, number 23. We increased the amount of Boy Scouts and Girl Guides and Cadet Force in schools, so much more discipline could have come into the school population. These are just some 24 implemented policies and programs which are there for the taking of the Ministry of Education. What have they been doing? Where are the people in the Ministry of Education? Where is the minister? Doesn't she know about that? 3 ministers of education don't know about that. Prime Minister Rowley hasn't been told about that. So when we talk about school violence, this morning I saw on one of the media again, but the Express had an editorial on this. The Guardian had an article written by Gail Alexander on this. And this morning I'm seeing on the Newsday, yes, Children's Authority, the team charged with setting fire to Child Support Center.
It's on mute.
Yeah. Principal begs for police patrols. Principal begs for police patrols to reduce school violence. That is norm. You should have been speaking with the Commissioner of Police and his team long ago. 7 years later, you're now asking for that? How shameful. Police intervention should be a last resort. If you had the systems in school implemented, you think that police need to be in school? A police job is out of school, not in school. You have the teachers, the principals, the deans of discipline, all the personnel within the school system, the guidance counselors, student support services division, all of these they have a role to play. And this thing hurts the psyche of citizens in Trinidad and Tobago when they see this going on in the schools. This is highly unacceptable. And the Minister of Education, sorry, I know you mean well, but you're not doing your job. You have sat down for too long, and you had 2 years in the pandemic to think this through. You were not active during the pandemic. So what were you doing? 2 years, nearly 2 years now, when you're having this problem, 1,341 student violence occasions in your school in one term. So other critical issues which resulted in degree school violence was students' academic performance. And students' academic performance improved considerably, thereby reducing the incidence of school violence by the personal improvement. When a child does well in school, you think the child is concerned about committing crime and behaving badly. They are focused on the improvement of their academic performance. And so when we improve the academic performance, you reduce the school violence. And don't forget that under Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bissa's PP government, we had the best academic performance in the history of Trinidad and Tobago's education system in 2014 in all 3 examinations, in CSET, in CAPE, and in SEA. And we bettered that in 2015, the best academic performance ever in the history of Trinidad and Tobago education under Mrs. Kamla Prasad Bisesa administration, and with my help, of course, and the help of the 14,000 teachers and all those that involved in education. And I still want to congratulate them now, even 7 years later, 8 years later, on the tremendous work that they did. Also, we provided avenues for students who were not academically inclined to move to tech-work education. So students who may not be bright, academically, they have a role. They go into tech-work studies within the school system, which gives serious encouragement to those. And we moved that. There were 42 schools doing tech-work. We moved it to 102 schools, where we implemented stronger and better tech-work education programs. And also with the Ministry of Tertiary Education, Minister Karim at that time, the number of tech-work centers were expanded, which gave rise to many more students' participation for their Form 5 examinations in tech-work. There was a vocational qualifying examination, VQE, in Standard 5, in Form 5, which will help to add it as a O-level subject, and which could facilitate the student back into the mainstream of the normal education system. All of these improvements in the education system and students' academic achievements and performance reduce considerably the students in discipline and violence. But what we have had over the last 7 years and worsening now in these 2 years of Rowley's second term of administration, all of these initiatives were destroyed and cast aside. So we left a legacy to Prime Minister Rowley government of Trinidad and Tobago, ranking with some of the best countries in education in the world. I remember going to a meeting with 102 ministers of education in London in our second year, and they were astonished to know that the work that we were doing in education in Trinidad and Tobago, they were so impressed. And we were ranking with Japan and South Korea and Finland and Hong Kong, etc. And Trinidad and Tobago was ranking with these countries, so with improved academic performance, which resulted in less students in discipline. So at the end, they had all the facts, information, programs, policies, which we left. But over 7 years, they allowed hate and malice and spite and indifference, anything that the People's Partnership implemented. The end result, children are now being sacrificed on the Rowley government's altar of malice and hate. And that is the nature of the beast. That is the Rowley government. Listening audience and viewing audience, I want to move to another issue which arose about a week ago, where the Minister of Finance indicated that he was going to cut the budgetary allocation for UWI, cut in funding. That issue recently by the Minister of Finance indicated that he was moving towards a 10% reduction in funding for UWI. Remember when the PP government moved tertiary education participation? I want to take you all back. Prime Minister Mrs. Kamla Prasad Bisesa and Minister of Tertiary Education, then Minister Karim, they helped to move tertiary education participation from in 2010, which was at 42%, to 72%, beyond our own expectations in 2015, by 2015. The best in the country's history in terms of tertiary education participation. You know where it is now? Less than where it's down in the 38% student participation. They have cut the GATE program considerably in a number of areas, resulting in less students participating in tertiary education. In undergraduate programs, less students in undergraduate, and worse, no postgraduate education for money for masters and PhDs. In fact, it was the partnership government which was funding those with first-class honors. The country must remember this at undergraduate level when you got a first-class honors. To move on to your PhDs, the state was paying for your work movement to your PhDs. All of that has stopped now. Less students receiving GATE funding, less students moving to university level for undergraduate education. This is resulting in terms of national development and skills, the worst that it has ever been. How can you develop your country when you're not paying emphasis on human capital development? I remember Mrs. Prasad Desessa as Prime Minister mentioning all the time human capital development. We want the best people in Trinidad and Tobago. We must be the best in the world. And she invested. Whereas Mrs. Desessa's PP government, she spends close to 6% of the GDP in keeping with international standards, and approximately 16% of annual budgetary allocation on education, because education and health are the cornerstone and fundamental pillars of any civilized society, and you don't mess with those things. You put your money where it should be put, in education and health. And this government has significantly reduced, and you have a Minister of Finance who plays games with finance. When he says he gives money to the Ministry of Education in terms of infrastructure development fund, they don't spend the money, he pulls it back, and he says that they saved that money. How deceptive and terrible. So this Rambally government expenditure on education has half that which Mrs. Desessa spent during her term of office in 2010-2015. That resulting now in serious compromise and the worst educational achievements in the history of Trinidad and Tobago in these last 7 years. Worsening yearly. Education has plummeted down. The success rate in education has gone down. People are becoming less educated, and we are developing a society of more functional illiteracy. Why should that be happening? I will speak a little more about this again. This Rambally government has done nothing or anything, implemented any program to secure. Where is international funding? Can you not get international funding for education? For instance, from the Rockefeller Foundation, from a number of institutions and so on around the world can give money to education, but you must put forward a strong package to help you in getting the funding. Researchers can get funding from international donor agencies, from international centers as well. But we seem to have a paucity of that from the University of the West Indies. So we can get a lot of money for education and research and development. But where is the government coming into this with helping the University of the West Indies and UTT and so on? They have not attracted any philanthropy from even former UWI graduates. They have been, so nobody, are they approaching the former UWI graduates who have been very successful to give some funding in different areas and in different fields of endeavor in the university level? They spoke about opening an offshore medical school. Well, I have been with the university for donkey years, from 1981 to about 2007 or something. And we never recognized offshore medical schools at University of the West Indies then. But the University of the West Indies began a little later when they saw what was happening in St. George's University Medical School, where the standards were raised, and we then recognized St. George's University in par with University of the West Indies Medical School. Rambally has been talking since he came into office about having an offshore medical school. He gave 51% of Couva Hospital to UWI. On what basis? UWI get 51% of Couva Hospital. They promised to have offshore medical schools for the last 7 years to bring in foreign exchange for use in education for medical students and both postgraduate working in health. But nothing has been done, pure old talk. Whereas neighboring Barbados, in partnership with at least 5 different offshore medical schools, and the campuses are in Barbados. And many of these islands within the Caribbean, even little Montserrat has an offshore medical school. So when these students come, they improve the amount of money that is being spent. They pay for programs in the school, so your country benefits. Look at Grenada, which has been able to sustain itself with a lot of contributions from the offshore medical school of St. George's of Grenada. And the Rambally government has only been giving lip service to this. Nothing has been done. And that is to concretize the fact that Rambally's government is incapable of any meaningful implementation. Why can't we now, with the TT programs that are available with digital education, have more international students being interested and participating in our degree program? It costs a student in USA about $50,000 US a year to receive their education. Why can't we get some of those students coming? I remember when we had to open the medical school in Trinidad, UWI Medical School in 1987. We brought in students from Manipal University. 49% of the students came from Manipal University. They paid $12,000 each. And within 4 years, the University of the West Indies, our medical school, was self-sufficient after 4 years. And when I was clinical dean of the medical school in 94 to 97, we were at about $24 million in the black. In fact, the university wanted to take the money from the medical faculty and spend it as they want, but we said, no, you can't do that. So there are various avenues of institutions developing skills and competence. And where is the government in helping these situations? Why can't we now, with the TT programs that are available and with digital education, have more international students being interested in our degree programs? And in medicine, to afford increased income from the participation of international students in our educational programs. But no thought process from this incompetent government, unable to think and move forward on any matter whatsoever. I remember a terminology they used, they're sitting on their hands. Sitting on their hands. This brain seemed to be absent from this government. And from Prime Minister Rowley's 7-year government. So you find them cutting education, and as a result, the whole human capacity and human development aspect and scientific development has been stunted and worsened significantly over the last 7 years of Rowley's incompetent reign, going in a rapid downhill course, where from research done, we have now worsened the situation of possibly 1/3 of the population being functionally illiterate. Our decreased functional capacity in terms of education, worsening on a daily basis with at least 50% of the students, all of these have gone through and lost, dropping out without any significant number of passes at CSEC level. No more than 50% of the students entering secondary schools are leaving without significant passes at CSEC level. And the statistics will show it. The minister alluded to it some time ago. So we have almost 7,000 students dropping out without any significant passes at CSEC. You know what that is fueling? Low confidence, low morals, no sense of self-value and self-worth. And these unfortunate students are now turning to crime. And this is where the crime is coming from. So they have destroyed all the gains in the education system which we had achieved between 2010 and 2015. Prime Minister Rowley's government should be ashamed to speak about education. They would want to make the excuse that the pandemic caused a lot of students' education levels to falter. But for 2 years, there are 100,000 students who required digital education through IT systems were without IT devices to facilitate their education at home. Many whose homes had no internet connectivity, and therefore the students and some had connectivity, they had to pay a lot of money, which they do not have, so their children did not receive their education. Almost 100,000 students were left without any type of education for more than a year, nearly some going into 2 years. So imagine the Rowley's government shamefully asking the private sector to help them with laptops and IT devices. How shameful can that be when you had so much, you were saving money from the school feeding program, 220 million per year in school feeding program. You were saving money from school security system, another 200 million. You were saving money, 45 million from the school transportation system. So you had nearly $500 million at your fingertips to purchase IT devices for students. 100,000 students at $1,000 per device is 100 million. You still have 400 million. Where does this government brain sit? You know, where does Prime Minister Rowley brain? Where is his brain? Where is his ministers? When you look for competence and capacity and capability on the other side, you could possibly identify 2 or 3 maximum. Where are the others? So they shamefully asked the private sector to help them with laptops and IT devices. One of the biggest shames that you could have for any country. Imagine a government begging for IT devices and forgetting its students, 100,000 students laying idly by. So they have effectively wiped out 2 generations of students. You could imagine this country, 2 generations of students have been wiped out, their education have been wiped out. They must bear that responsibility. So when they see crime taking place in the country, they are responsible for the crime because they didn't educate their children. They failed to do so. I grieve and my heart aches when I see the amount of people on the CPEP and URP programs. You know, we need people to do that work, but unfortunately some of these had not benefited from the education program. So the IT system in the schools is a mess. When we have connectivity to all secondary schools and a number of homes with at least an average of 30 megabytes per second in schools, that has gone through. Now many schools have lost their connectivity. The IT classrooms which had computer rooms, some schools had at least 3 computer rooms with at least 50 functioning computers in the computer labs. They are no longer functioning. They fired the 150 IT technicians who were servicing these computers in the computer rooms. We have trained over 6,000 teachers at different levels of ICT learning and education and development. And these teachers did a marvelous job in imparting knowledge through the digital system at home to students, but there has been no improvement. Teachers won global prizes with major IT companies. We came first and second in international competitions in IT. This is where we were, Trinidad and Tobago. We had 21st century smart classrooms. We partnered with Samsung with a number of schools in the country. That this has now gone to waste by this Rowley government. No improvement. We had audiovisual system in each one of the secondary school. That has been allowed to decay. We had interactive whiteboards with a number of schools. They are no longer sustainable to make education that more meaningful. So they destroy the whole IT systems in school, and they talk about digitization of the national economy, the nation. You can't even digitize the school population where you're going nationally. And this is continuing to result in the worsening and deterioration of our education sector and the achievements and attainment for the students. So it's a shameful performance by Prime Minister Rowley and his government. Our IT system was so much at the forefront globally that we were recognized in Latin America and Caribbean as one of the leading countries in this field, and even globally, while Russia was moving to begin IT programs for 3,000 schools, and President Obama was asking the private sector of the United States to assist him with 100 million each to have laptops and IT devices for students in rural areas. We were way ahead of them. We had gone beyond them already. We had already marched forward, and we were one of the leading countries in the world with IT system, in digital system of education. And we were moving to have e-textbooks in mathematics and English for first formers after we had given out over 95,000 laptops to students over the 5-year period. Some of which students who got them are still, they still have them. And sometimes I meet some of them, they say, Dr. Gopeesingh, the laptops that Mrs. Bisessa and you all at the Ministry of Education gave, look, I still have it. And they're using that for the university programs and even for the world of work now. And Mrs. Bisessa was planning to give 4th form and 4th standard and 5th students Android tablets in the primary school. We became the Center for Virtual Education, for Latin America and the Caribbean. Such was the international recognition affirmed to Trinidad and Tobago in IT systems. All of that have disappeared under Rowley. We had partnered with UNESCO as well to continue to help with the curriculum and programs for digital education. And we had partnered with Microsoft, which had put in about 18 systems within the laptops themselves for education. We had trained almost 6,000 teachers, and we had provided laptops to principals, supervisors, thousands of teachers, and then 90,000 plus students. We assisted St. Lucia government in introducing their programs, their laptop programs, and a group of Latin American, Caribbean countries looked to Trinidad and Tobago as a leader in digital education in the region. We were world leaders, and Trinidad and Tobago became the first country in the world to achieve universal early childhood education. That has been totally disappeared now, with little or no ability for students between ages 3 and 4 to have free early childhood education. We have trained over 1,000 teachers in early childhood education, either at certificate or bachelor's degree program. All our teachers in primary schools became qualified at having at least a first degree qualification, and we filled the vacancies of substitute teachers, remedial teachers. That is the work of Prime Minister Kamla Prasad Bisesa government then, and I gave help as Minister of Education. I just want to spend a few moments on the school construction program. After 7 years of Rowley's education system, thousands of students are still in cramped learning environment in mandirs and in mosques and community centers. Imagine 500 students in a school and have to be in a community center, in a mandir and a mosque, and you call that education? I remember Dr. Munila begging for during the 5 years for the Ramai Trace Hindu School to be constructed. It was 95% completed, and many of my colleagues then and many now present still asking for the early childhood education centers and the primary schools to be completed. And they spitefully decided not to continue the 2 secondary schools in the Prime Minister Mrs. Bisesa's constituency, the Shiva boys and the Pravati girls, which was 75% completed. But spite and hate and malice from Prime Minister Rowley, I'm not going to finish it. Leave it to decay. Let donkeys and cows run all over it. Let grass come up. Let snakes and vermin come up. But the dirty mind and the spiteful and vindictive mind, I could say that proudly. Because when I say that with a conscience and a heart. You can't do that to education. What about the thousands of children who are in the mosques and the temples for years and years, more students coming in, and they're crowded, and these students survive. They survive despite what you're doing to them. Maliciousness, spite, hatefulness. And they decided not to continue the construction of any of the 70+ schools that we left behind for them to finish. And they are currently wasting millions of dollars by allowing these schools to decay, some of which were more than 95% completed. But that is the malice and the wickedness of Prime Minister Rowley and his cohorts, causing students to suffer in these cramped conditions. How do these PNM ministers feel? How does Prime Minister Rowley feel? Are you without a conscience? Are you unconscionable when you see students suffering like that? And you're boasting that all the schools open when one day after the school opened, 50 schools closed. So this will come back to haunt them. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have given you just a snippet of where we are in the education system now. It is the worst that it has ever been. And every year that passes, it becomes worse and worse. And we call upon the Prime Minister Rowley government to begin to lift your thinking, bring your team together, bring your whatever educational and thinking you have left within your system to come to the benefit of the students in this country. And ladies and gentlemen, after considering these facts, truly, it is time for this Rowley government to just get out of office. Get out of office. Give our students, their parents and nation a fighting chance to recover. And the people of Trinidad and Tobago, give them a fighting chance to recover and to survive. And to survive your destructive, disastrous, ruinous regime. Time to end this. Call an election and let the people decide. Enough is enough. And you're doing damage and destroying almost every aspect of national development, from health to education to all the other various ministries. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
We have some questions.
Mr. Rambally, to you first.
Yes.
In terms of, do you think that the actions of AG Amor, in terms of his recusal and his silence, do you think that that is sufficient in terms of addressing the issue at the moment? And then secondly, in our lead article today, we know that you called for the association to speak and address the matter. In our article today, it was said that the lawyers have chosen this route as Senior Counsel Sophia Choate, the current president of the association, and Rajiv Prasad, the vice president, once represented some of the accused in the Piarco Airport corruption case. It is open to an aggrieved client or third party to seek the permission of the disciplinary committee of the association to lodge a complaint against AMO. Do you think that this also is sufficient? And what more would you want from the law association in the matter?
Okay, so let me deal first with your first question, this issue of recusal and Mr. Amo's self-inflicted or self-adopted silence. Number one, there is no recusal. The damage has been done already. What Mr. Amo has done is he has put the state of Trinidad and Tobago in a very embarrassing position. Knowing that he represented the defendants in the Miami proceedings, what he did was that earlier in the local proceedings, what he has done is he has put the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in an embarrassing position, knowing he has a conflict and then going to put himself on the other side to represent the plaintiff, which is the Republic. So there isn't a question of recusal. The damage has been done. Now there are two types of conflict. One is the actual conflict, which is what arises here. There's no doubt that the conflict arose. In fact, he has admitted that. Sorry. So in fact, he has admitted this this conflict of interest. But there's also what is called in law, we have also the rule of presumptive prejudice. And that arises where an attorney actively participates in conflicting interests. That arises here now. So what happens to Trinidad and Tobago? Mr. Kwaitong and others, contrary to if the PNM wants to come and say we are now, trumpeting rights for other persons, it's not that, They have recourse. Mr. Kwaitong and others went before the Miami 11th Circuit Court and they got their relief. They are entitled to file an application, which they did, a motion to strike and to disqualify AG Amo, and they were successful. So they got their relief. But what is the relief for Trinidad and Tobago? What rights do the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago have now that the AG has already gone and put himself and put the state in this embarrassing position? We don't have those rights that are easily available to those defendants. So this is where we are saying that the best course to adopt, having embarrassed this public office and this critical institution in Trinidad and Tobago, he must step down. You cannot continue to erode the public's trust in the administration of justice. And that is why I said earlier that his actions has now gone in that realm of eroding the administration. The public's notion of what justice is something that has been eroded, and it is now on shaky grounds. So I hope I have answered your first question. So it's not a matter of if recusal and his vow of silence will suffice. The damage has been done. Really, that is just self-serving for him to come and say he recused himself now, because the Miami court has already given an order. He should have known much better, right? He ought to have known better when he was taking up the position as Attorney General. He ought to have advised the Prime Minister. Prime Minister is no spring chicken in the politics either, right? He's one of the most senior politicians in the Parliament and out of the Parliament. And he ought to know better, knowing in the public domain that these matters existed in the system, that who it was actually representing these persons who were before the local courts. It wasn't that long ago. Your second question, which is the Law Association, I think your question is whether or not the actions taken are sufficient. Let me first deal with this notion, or let me not the factual statement in that article that the president and the vice president would have been attorneys on record for clients in that same Piarco local preliminary inquiry, if I may call it that. The Law Association comprises the president, you have a vice president, you have a treasurer, you have a secretary, you have senior ordinary members, and you have junior ordinary members. If the president and the vice president happen to have a position, I do not see why that quorum cannot be formed by the association to at the very least issue a public release as to what the association's position is, without any notion or issue of conflict even on the president and vice president's part. They are still in a position to actually say, let us call a meeting, send out a release to the membership to say, okay, we are soliciting your views. Nothing like that has been done. So it cannot be a defense that the president and the vice president are somehow conflicted and therefore they are unable to speak on this issue. If that is the defense of the executive of the law association, and don't get me wrong, I'm not attacking them, but if that is their defense, they are like AG Armour. Step down, move aside, let the association run properly according to the mandate, not according to Dinesh Rambally, not according to Dr. Gopeesingh, not according to the UNC, according to the Legal Profession Act. So their actions are insufficient. It's very lethargic, and that is why I use the term very carefully. It is very concerning to see what the law association is not doing. All right, so that is with respect to those two. I hope I have cleared up anything.
Thank you. And Dr. Gopeesingh, we would have seen as well, you too would have spoken to the article in today's Newsday. And as noted in that article, one of the respondents spoke to the issue of parenting. What role do you think parenting plays, Dr. Gopeesingh, in the issues of indiscipline that we are seeing in today's?
Significant research internationally and even nationally, because we have done a research study on 3,000 students. The research findings are there at the Ministry of Education, where we randomized early childhood education centers and primary school students, 3,000, and did with an international organization with local counterparts for over an 18-month period to 2 years. Yeah. And they found that out of the first 25% of students did well on their own with a little bit of strengthening and tightening. Another 25% did very well with parenting around their side. And within a 6-month period, those children's performance with early childhood and primary schools improved significantly. So parenting and education plays a significant, another 25%, well, there were some with medical problems and so on.
Yes.
And so parenting and education has been shown scientifically, and all the education research, of course, to contribute significantly to children's improvement in their educational performance. And of course, once your performance improves, generally your desire to go into other negative aspects become diminished. So you find improvement in the education performance, decrease in the negative aspects of their lives, and you will see it in day-to-day life, parents around the children. And I want to appeal to the fathers of this nation. Let me take this opportunity, please. Go with your children, help to educate your children, be a part of your children's education. Don't leave it only on the mothers, and you will see the benefits of your child's development once you become active in their participation. Take them to school, listen to them when you're taking them to school, be a part of their lives, and that this should be a national appeal to all fathers to do their work that is required.
And Dr. Gopeesingh, you would have mentioned as well an earlier article done by Newsday that it spoke to the issue of social media. And some might say that shifting cultural norms and values also play into indiscipline that we are seeing in today's schools. Do you think that is so?
It's a painful and difficult question to answer, but it is searching. And I particularly would want to see the social values and the norms of behavior improve considerably in this country. And we're seeing a lot of abnormal norms that are taking place in terms of conduct of adults. And if a prime minister doesn't say it, I would venture to say it, that we need to lift our sense of values and behavioral patterns and norms as adults so that the children of today can benefit from what they see. And if they see abnormal behavioral patterns, they may emulate it. But when you see the good value systems being implemented and put into place, and the students are indoctrinated by visual looking at it, by hearing it, by speaking with their seniors. And then the Prime Minister, President Nelson Mandela said, it takes a village to raise a child. And communities coming together to help children benefit these children. So it's time we go back to those value systems. And schools can only do a certain amount. They spend 5 or 6 hours in schools. but the 18 hours per day are at home. I empathize with the single parents, with the single mothers, but we make an appeal to the fathers as well to join in their education. Let us lift the morals and values of our society. Let us lift the performance of our students in our schools by the emulation of the parental behavior which should be acceptable to the norms and values of society.
We have a question for MP Rambally. MP Rambally, we often hear that the Attorney General is the titular head of the bar. How does his conduct impact on your role as head of the bar and for the legal fraternity as well?
Well, as the titular head of the bar, and this is something that I alluded to earlier, he actually, I have described him as an ambassador of the legal profession. So the Attorney General is expected to personify or to embody the pinnacle or the high standards that the legal profession must ascribe to achieve and to abide by the Attorney General conducting himself in a manner which is anything short of instilling public trust and confidence in his position as the titular head. It is going to translate, it is going to go downwards into the legal profession itself now really not having proper standards. We have to remember that lawyers or the legal profession is said to be the vanguard, the last fight, last stand against what is a fight against democracy. So if it is democracy's falling, we expect lawyers to really step forward and to take up that fight. And so if it is the Attorney General, his standards now codify anything which is a waning of public trust and confidence, we can expect the profession to now go into shambles. The society by extension, the administration of justice is going to suffer from an unnecessary inflict of evil. And in this case, we are saying this conflict of interest has really embarrassed us in a manner which really was self-engineered, and it is really a legal disgrace.
Also, is the opposition aware who exactly prepared the affidavit for the Attorney General?
If the opposition is aware? No, I think sequel law would be aware of who prepared that affidavit, and the Attorney General.
You mentioned that the Attorney General, well, you reminded us that the Attorney General is a member of the government. What responsibility does the Prime Minister have now to act on this matter?
Well, he has a duty to the citizenry, to the public of Trinidad and Tobago, to ensure that the next in command after himself, if found wanting, as is clearly the case here now, to ensure that to protect that institution, the office of the Attorney General, to protect the institution and to ensure that that institution, which is critical to the administration of justice, is protected on all counts. And so he must make sure that he removes the AG so that there's no further erosion of the confidence which people previously had in the AG's office. And so it is that simple. If it is the Prime Minister understands that the government must lead by example, it is just that simple. He now has to lead by example himself by removing the Attorney General. You know, as I indicated to another reporter earlier, if it is that he is allowed to, AG Amo is allowed to continue in the position of Attorney General, this matter is going to embarrass us further, and it is going to cost us taxpayers' dollars to try and remedy an obvious lack of discretion and judgment call on his part in how he approached that matter in Miami.
I don't think we have any more questions.
Permit me to say a very special thanks to members of the media and the viewing and listening audience. Thank you for joining us to our United National Congress Sunday Media Conference. We'll see you again in the future. Thank you. Have a great day.